The reunion had barely started when my sister lifted her wine glass, looked me up and down, and smiled like she'd been waiting 4 years for this moment. Still single. The conversation around the patio faded into uncomfortable silence. Before I could answer, Daniel, my ex-husband and now Vanessa's husband, slipped an arm around her waist and laughed. "Hey, loser. Still the same?" A few cousins exchanged awkward glances. Someone forced out a nervous chuckle. No one told them to stop. I set my purse beside an empty chair and calmly poured myself a glass of iced tea. "I see nothing's changed," I said. Vanessa smirked. "Actually, everything changed. I'm the one married to him now." Daniel grinned as if he'd just won an argument that had lasted 4 years. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. That seemed to disappoint them more than any insult ever could. They had expected tears. They had expected anger. Instead, I simply looked toward my parents. Dad stared at the ground. Mom hadn't said a single word since I arrived. Then, without warning, she slowly stood. She picked up a thick, sealed folder that had been sitting beside her chair all afternoon. "Perfect timing," she said quietly. Everyone turned toward her. "I have something important to tell all of you." Vanessa's confident smile remained exactly where it was until my mother looked directly into her eyes. For the first time that afternoon, my sister's expression faltered. Mom rested one hand on the folder. "I think everyone deserves to hear the truth. 4 years earlier, I never imagined I'd be standing in my parents' backyard again. After my divorce, I stopped attending birthdays, Christmas dinners, anniversaries. Every family event that included Vanessa and Daniel. It wasn't because I couldn't face them. It was because I was tired of being the only person expected to be uncomfortable while everyone else pretended betrayal had an expiration date. Apparently, 4 years was considered long enough. When Mom called me 2 weeks earlier, her voice sounded strangely formal. "I'd really like you to come to the reunion this year. I don't think that's a good idea. It matters to me." That was all she would say. No explanation, no reassurance, no promise that Vanessa and Daniel would behave differently. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The moment I walked through the gate that afternoon, I knew I had made a mistake. Vanessa wore designer jewelry that practically announced itself from across the yard. Daniel followed her around, carrying drinks and laughing louder than anyone else. Together, they looked exactly like the couple they had always wanted everyone to believe they were. Successful, admired, untouchable. Every few minutes, Vanessa glanced in my direction, almost checking whether I looked miserable enough. I didn't give her the satisfaction. But what unsettled me wasn't Vanessa. It was my mother. Normally, she rushed to smooth over tension before it started. Not today. She watched every conversation, every reaction, every expression. Almost like she had been waiting for something or someone. When Daniel mocked me and Vanessa laughed, Mom didn't interrupt. She simply reached for the sealed folder beside her chair. Now every relative had gone silent. Vanessa folded her arms. "Mom, what is this? Some kind of speech?" Mom ignored the question. Instead, she carefully broke the seal on the folder. The sound of the paper seemed unnaturally loud. She looked around the table one person at a time before finally speaking. "I've spent the last year learning things about this family that I should have known much sooner." Then she pulled out the first document. My stomach tightened. Not because I was afraid of Vanessa anymore. Because I had lived through this before. 4 years earlier, my parents had gathered everyone into the living room after my marriage collapsed. I had walked into that room believing they wanted to support me. Instead, they wanted me to keep quiet. Dad had leaned forward with his hands clasped. "Ashley, your marriage is over. Nothing you say now will change that." I stared at him. "So you're saying I should pretend my own sister didn't sleep with my husband?" Mom had sighed heavily. "We're saying we're still one family." One family. Those 2 words had echoed in my head for years. Not one person had asked how I was sleeping. Not one person had asked whether I was eating. The only concern seemed to be making sure no one outside the family discovered what Vanessa and Daniel had done. I found out about the affair by accident. Daniel had forgotten his tablet at home while he was in the shower. A message flashed across the screen. I almost ignored it. Then I saw my sister's name. I opened it. I can't wait until she finally finds out, Vanessa had written. Daniel replied only seconds later. Just a little longer. She still believes everything I tell her. I remember reading those words 3 times before they made sense. Then another message appeared. Promise me we'll stop pretending after Dad's birthday, Daniel answered. I promise. Then we can finally be together. My hands had gone numb. I walked into the bathroom holding the tablet. Daniel looked up from the sink, his face drained of color. Ashley, how long? He reached for the tablet. It isn't what you how long. His shoulders dropped. About 8 months. 8 months. For 8 months, my husband had kissed me goodbye every morning before secretly meeting my own sister. I couldn't even cry. I simply walked out. Vanessa didn't wait for me to confront her. She arrived at our house the next morning as though she were doing me a favor. She stood on my front porch wearing sunglasses and crossed her arms. You deserve the truth. I laughed once. The truth? You were never enough for him. She didn't whisper it. She didn't hesitate. You were always working, always serious. Daniel wanted someone who actually made him happy. I looked at my own sister and realized she genuinely believed she had won something valuable. Then Daniel stepped out behind her. He wouldn't even look me in the eyes. I never meant to hurt you. No, I answered quietly. You just did. He rubbed the back of his neck. I fell in love with my sister. Neither of them denied it. Neither apologized. Instead, they acted like I was simply standing in the way of their happiness. When our divorce became final, they were already planning their wedding. My parents attended. I didn't. A few relatives called afterward. Most repeated the same sentence. You have to let it go eventually. As though betrayal had an expiration date. As though healing could be scheduled around family holidays. So I stopped coming. I buried myself in work. My career became my refuge. Case by case. Year by year. I rebuilt a life that belonged entirely to me. I bought my own home. Made partner track at my law firm. Built friendships with people who valued loyalty instead of convenience. I never asked my family for anything again, which was why standing in that backyard now felt surreal. Mom was still holding the folder. The entire family was staring at her. I quietly stepped closer, keeping my voice low enough that no one else could hear. I asked, "Why did you invite me?" She looked at me with tired eyes. I hadn't noticed before because today ends everything. I searched her face. Was she finally asking everyone to forgive Vanessa? Was she expecting me to smile, hug my sister, and pretend the last 4 years had never happened? Or had something happened that I didn't know about? Mom gave nothing away. She simply turned back toward the family. I looked at the folder in her hands. For the first time that afternoon, I realized she wasn't afraid. She looked prepared. What exactly had my mother been hiding for an entire year? My mother placed both hands on the dining table. No one spoke. The backyard that had been filled with laughter just minutes earlier had gone completely silent. Vanessa forced a smile. Mom, you're making everyone nervous. Mom didn't even look at her. Instead, she looked around the table, making eye contact with each relative. I owe someone here an apology. Vanessa reached for Daniel's hand. I saw her relax. She thought she already knew where this was going. Mom turned toward me. Ashley. My name hung in the air. I failed you. No one moved. Dad slowly looked up from his plate. Mom continued before anyone could interrupt. When Ashley's marriage fell apart, I cared more about keeping this family together than finding out what was actually true. She swallowed hard. I convinced myself that if everyone stayed quiet, eventually the pain would disappear. She shook her head. I was wrong. Vanessa laughed uneasily. Oh, come on, Mom. This was 4 years ago. Mom ignored her. I asked my oldest daughter to carry the burden of everyone else's comfort. She turned to me. I watched you leave every holiday gathering because I didn't have the courage to do the right thing. My throat tightened, not because she was defending me, because it was the first time she'd ever admitted it aloud. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably. My Aunt Linda quietly lowered her eyes. My cousin Ethan folded his arms and stared at the table. No one had expected this. Vanessa finally stepped forward. Mom, Ashley has obviously been filling your head with stories. I haven't spoken to Ashley about this. Vanessa blinked. What? I haven't discussed any of this with her. For the first time, confusion replaced Vanessa's confidence. Mom reached into the folder and removed another document. This started almost a year ago. She held up several printed bank statements. I noticed money disappearing from my retirement account. Dad frowned. I thought those were the investment transfers. So did I. Mom nodded. At first, she looked directly at everyone. I believed every explanation I was given. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. Mom, retirement accounts fluctuate. They do. Mom agreed calmly. But they don't authorize wire transfers on their own. The air seemed to leave the patio. Daniel suddenly spoke. There has to be some mistake. Mom calmly slid another sheet onto the table. There wasn't, she continued. I spent months thinking perhaps I had forgotten signing something. So I checked. I reviewed every account, every statement, every authorization. She looked toward me again. During that time, I also discovered something else. She smiled sadly. I thought Ashley had abandoned this family. I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. I believed she didn't care anymore. Mom slowly shook her head. I couldn't have been more wrong. She reached into the folder again. This, she lifted several receipts, is a list of hospital bills. No one understood, Mom continued. When your Uncle Robert needed surgery 2 years ago, she looked toward my uncle. Someone anonymously paid the balance. Uncle Robert frowned. I never knew who did that. When your cousin Emily's daughter needed emergency treatment, Emily looked stunned. Someone covered those expenses too. Emily whispered. We were told a private donor helped. Mom nodded. There was. She looked directly at me. It was Ashley. The silence became almost unbearable. I immediately shook my head. I never wanted anyone to know. I know. Mom's voice softened. But they deserve to. She looked back at the family. While many of us believed Ashley wanted nothing to do with this family, she quietly helped whenever someone was truly in need. My aunt covered her mouth. I had no idea. Neither did anyone else. Ashley, the daughter everyone had labeled bitter and selfish, had been supporting family members from the shadows without asking for recognition. Vanessa suddenly scoffed. So what? She paid a few bills. I saw several relatives turn toward her. The timing couldn't have been worse. Mom's expression hardened. No, it wasn't a few bills. She placed another stack of papers beside the first because while Ashley was quietly giving, someone else was quietly taking. She slowly turned her head, not toward me, toward Vanessa. Daniel's smile disappeared. His fingers loosened around his glass. Across the table, whispers began spreading from one relative to another. What does she mean? Taking money. From who? Vanessa laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. Mom didn't answer. Instead, she carefully spread a row of detailed bank statements across the center of the dining table for everyone to see. Every head around the table leaned forward. The papers covered nearly the entire length of the dining table. Account statements, transfer records, wire confirmations, pages marked with colored tabs. Vanessa stared at them for only a second before letting out a short laugh. This is insane. She looked around at everyone. Mom doesn't understand financial paperwork. Daniel immediately stepped beside her. Exactly. He pointed toward the documents without touching them. Anyone can print bank statements. Mom didn't flinch. I expected you'd say that. Dad finally spoke. What exactly are we looking at? Mom slid one page toward him. Read the highlighted lines. Dad adjusted his glasses. As he scanned the page, the color slowly drained from his face. This he stopped. These transfers. Mom nodded. They continued for almost 3 years. Vanessa folded her arms. You gave us money. I helped you, Mom corrected. I never authorized this. Daniel stepped forward. There must be missing paperwork. There isn't, Mom answered calmly. I checked. Vanessa looked directly at me. This is because of Ashley. I blinked. What? You couldn't stand seeing us happy? She pointed at me. You've been manipulating Mom. I almost laughed. I didn't even know any of this existed. Convenient. Daniel crossed his arms. She's an attorney. She knows how to manufacture evidence. Several relatives looked uncertain, Not because they believed him, because they didn't know what to believe anymore. Mom quietly reached into the folder again. I thought you might accuse Ashley. She removed another envelope, so I prepared for that too. She opened it. Inside was a bound report nearly an inch thick. The documents on the table were only my records. She placed the report beside them. This is the independent forensic accounting report. The room became still. I hired an outside firm 6 months ago. Vanessa's confidence flickered. You what? I wanted someone with no connection to this family. Mom looked around the table. They examined every account, every withdrawal, every transfer. They followed every dollar. Daniel swallowed. His hand tightened around the back of his chair. Mom continued. The money repeatedly moved through accounts controlled by Vanessa and Daniel. Vanessa immediately shook her head. That's impossible. It isn't. Mom gently turned several pages. They found the same routing numbers, the same receiving accounts, the same electronic authorizations. Dad stared at Vanessa. You told me those vacations were paid for by Daniel's bonuses. Daniel answered too quickly. They were. Mom quietly slid another page toward him. No. She tapped the document. Those vacations happened within days of these transfers. No one spoke. My cousin Ethan slowly picked up one statement. His eyes moved from one highlighted entry to another. There are dozens of them. There are 43, Mom replied. The number settled over the table like a weight. 43, not one mistake, not two. A pattern. Years of one decision after another. I looked at Vanessa. For the first time since I'd arrived, she wasn't smiling. She kept glancing toward Daniel, silently, waiting for him to fix this. He couldn't. Mom continued. The luxury SUV. She looked at Vanessa. The kitchen renovation, then Daniel. The anniversary trip to Italy, she paused. You told everyone your careers paid for those. She slowly shook her head. They didn't, Dad whispered. My God. My aunt covered her mouth. So all this time, Mom nodded once. They were living far beyond what they earned, and they filled the gap with our retirement savings. Vanessa slammed both hands onto the table. No. Her voice cracked. You wanted to help us. I did, Mom answered, but I never agreed to deception. Daniel stepped between them. We can explain. Mom looked directly at him. I've already heard every explanation. She closed the folder. I don't believe any of them anymore. Daniel suddenly grabbed his car keys from the table. This conversation is over. He turned toward the driveway. Vanessa hurried after him. We're leaving. Neither of them made it 3 steps. Mom spoke without raising her voice. I wouldn't. They stopped slowly. Neither turned around. Dad frowned. What do you mean? Mom took a slow breath. Before today, I met with my attorney. She looked directly at Vanessa. I also met with our bank. She turned toward Daniel. And financial institutions have already frozen every disputed account connected to these transfers until the investigation is complete. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. Vanessa spun around. You froze our accounts. I reported suspicious financial activity. Mom's voice remained calm, and I signed the paperwork for a formal legal complaint. Vanessa's face went completely pale. This isn't funny. It wasn't meant to be. Daniel looked toward the front gate almost instinctively, as though calculating whether leaving would somehow erase everything. At that exact moment, the gate opened. Every person at the reunion turned toward it. A man in a dark navy suit stepped through carrying a leather briefcase and another thick folder. He walked calmly across the backyard. Mom looked at him and nodded. Thank you for coming. The man set the briefcase beside the table. I'm sorry I'm a few minutes late. He looked directly at Vanessa and Daniel before introducing himself. I'm the Bennett family's attorney. The attorney placed his briefcase on the table and unclasped it. No one moved. Even the children who had been playing at the far end of the yard had stopped running around, sensing that something serious was happening. He removed a neatly organized file and looked at my mother. Mrs. Bennett, would you like me to proceed? Mom nodded. Please. He opened the file. My firm was retained 9 months ago to review Mrs. Bennett's financial records after she reported repeated, unauthorized transfers. Vanessa finally found her voice. This is unbelievable. She looked at Dad. Tell him to stop. Dad didn't answer. His eyes never left the documents in front of him. The attorney continued, "Our investigation confirmed that 43 separate transfers were made under false representations." He looked around the table. In nearly every instance, Mrs. Bennet was told the money was needed for urgent medical expenses, business investments, temporary financial emergencies, or tax obligations. Mom quietly added, "None of those explanations were true." The attorney nodded. The funds were instead redirected into accounts controlled by Vanessa Bennet and Daniel Carter. Daniel stepped forward. "We intended to pay it back." The attorney calmly replied, "You never made a single repayment." Silence. Vanessa shook her head frantically. "Mom wanted to help us." Mom looked directly at her. "I wanted to help my daughter." Her voice broke for the first time all afternoon. "I didn't know my kindness had become your business model." Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Dad slowly stood, his chair scraped across the patio. He looked at Vanessa as though he didn't recognize her. "Did you really do this?" Vanessa reached toward him. "Dad, answer me." Tears filled her eyes. "We were struggling." Dad stared at her. "So you lied." She couldn't deny it. Daniel tried one last time. "We never meant for this to happen." I looked at him for the first time in several minutes. "You mean you never meant to get caught?" He lowered his eyes. He didn't answer. The attorney closed one file and opened another. "There is one additional matter." Mom nodded. "Go ahead." He removed a signed legal document. Last month, Mrs. Bennet executed a revised estate plan. Vanessa frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" The attorney looked directly at her. "Under the revised estate documents, you are no longer a beneficiary." The words landed harder than any shout could have. Vanessa stared at him. "What? The previous estate plan has been revoked?" "No." She looked desperately at Mom. "No, you can't do that." "I already did." Mom's voice was steady now. "You spent years convincing me Ashley couldn't be trusted." She shook her head. "All that time, the only people stealing from me were standing beside you." Vanessa's shoulders began to shake. "I made mistakes." "You made choices," Mom corrected. Over and over again, the attorney continued. "And Mrs. Bennet has also appointed Ashley Bennet as executive of her estate." Every eye in the backyard turned toward me. I hadn't known. I looked at Mom. "You didn't tell me." She smiled sadly. "I wanted you to hear it with everyone else. I spent years believing the wrong daughter." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I won't make that mistake again." I walked over and took her hand. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. We didn't need to. Some apologies don't erase the past, but sincere ones can change the future. Behind us, several relatives began speaking at once. My Aunt Linda approached me first. "Ashley." She wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry. I should have asked your side." My cousin Ethan nodded. "We all should have." One by one, relatives admitted they had accepted the easiest version of the story instead of the truthful one. No one defended Vanessa anymore. She looked around the yard searching for someone, anyone, to stand beside her. There wasn't anyone. Daniel reached for her arm. "We should go." She nodded weakly. Neither of them argued. Neither of them protested. For the first time in 4 years, they walked away without believing they had won. Over the following months, the consequences continued. The disputed funds became part of formal recovery proceedings. Financial investigators worked to trace every unauthorized transfer. Daniel's professional reputation suffered after the investigation became known among clients and colleagues. The life they had carefully presented as effortless success quickly began to unravel. My mother focused on rebuilding what mattered instead of protecting appearances. She called me every week, not because she felt guilty, but because she genuinely wanted her daughter back. Dad apologized more than once, not with speeches, with consistency. He showed up. He listened. He stopped pretending silence was the same as peace. As for me, I stayed exactly what Vanessa had mocked me for being single. Not because no one wanted me, because I had finally learned that being alone was infinitely better than building a life with people who confused betrayal with love. Months later, I returned to my parents' house for another family gathering. It was much smaller, much quieter. There were no forced smiles, no whispered alliances, no pretending, just honest conversations, shared meals, and people who understood that trust, once broken, has to be earned back. As I helped my mother clear the dinner table, she looked at me and smiled. "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words meant more than every apology that had come before them. Years earlier, I thought losing my husband had destroyed my life. Standing there beside my mother, I finally understood the truth. Losing Daniel had never been the tragedy. Keeping him would have been. The last time my sister asked if I was still single, she thought she had already won. She never imagined the reunion would be remembered as the day the lies ended and my life truly began.